Mahalo Saifua and welcome. I would like to invite Lepale Ozi Simanu, who is the Assistant Resident Representative of the UNDP Environment and Climate Change Unit, to share with us his presentation on Stockholm Plus 50 and how our voices are important to amplify our message on resolving climate, nature, and pollution challenges. Lawa Fionga Lepale.
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity. Distinguished guest speakers, chief executive officers, management and staff of government ministries, partners, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure on behalf of the UNDP resident representative to welcome you all to the Stockholm Plus 50 National Consultations webinar with government ministries. Talafalava and welcome. The Stockholm Plus 50 will commemorate the 50 years since the convening of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment and celebrate 50 years of global environmental action by recognizing the importance of multilateralism in tackling the Earth's triple planetary crisis: climate, nature, and pollution. The national consultations will be an occasion to raise awareness about the importance of protecting our planet. It is an opportunity for members of the community, businesses, organizations, academic institutions, youth, women development partners, and government to dialogue on issues relevant to overcome the triple planetary crisis of climate change, of nature and biodiversity loss, and of pollution and waste. The outcomes of these national dialogues will contribute to the international meeting to be held in June this year at Stockholm, Sweden, entitled Stockholm Plus 50, A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity, which will be held during the week of World Environment Day. The Stockholm Plus 50 also aims to help accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals during the decade of action, including through sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, as we are in at this stage. We trust the consultation will spark interesting dialogues and see how we can best address critical environmental issues in Samoa, and hopefully to inspire a younger generation to take these resolutions further and to a better future. With that, I would like to thank our panelists for this morning, Dr. Fiona, for taking time away from your busy schedule to partake in this dialogue. We thank you for your commitment to seeking solutions and better ways to address what was lacking in the past 50 years since the first UN conference on the environment, particularly in your respective sectors. So I wish the best for the dialogue today, and I encourage everyone who's joining online to partake in this consultation, whether it's during the dialogue or through the State of the Planet Global Survey that will be shared by our moderators and team during the discussions. Ya manuia telele fela fla inga so ifo me manuia.
Paftailo Fionga Lepale, ia fatalo fa atu pa ia malmamalo tato maftanga le neita yao, and welcome to today's Stockholm Plus 50 National Consultation and what is the final of our webinar series that has taken place over the last 2 weeks. My name is Kaisarina Salisa, and I am the Head of Exploration for the UNDP Accelerator Lab, and I will be your moderator for the next 2 hours. Thank you to our panelists and to all our participants for taking the time out to tune in and take part in these crucial conversations around the importance of protecting our planet and complementing the important spaces that have been created for discussing and resolving climate, nature, and pollution challenges. Before proceeding, just a few housekeeping rules to ease our online conversations. First and foremost, all our participants are requested to type in their questions specifically in the Q&A chat box. If you have a question for a specific speaker, please mention it along with the question. All our questions from participants would be answered during the Q&A session towards the last part of the webinar. At around 11:10 a.m., we will share a global survey for the participants to get their views on the state of the planet. We are also privileged to host Noe Maevanga Matene, who is our sign language translator, requesting all speakers to speak loudly, clearly, and slowly for our translator to be able to translate well. Allow me now to introduce our guest speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming our first speaker, whose presence has very much been that of a rising star in the environment sector. None other than Leale Salanoa Frances Brown Ropena, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Prior to her appointment as the CEO, she was the Assistant Chief Executive Officer of the Environment Sector Coordination Division. Leale Salanoa has extensive experience in the environment sector, as she has been with the ministry for more than 10 years and has also held the role of the Water and Sanitation Sector Coordinator. Our next speaker is Dr. Ramona Stephanie Sulifoa and is no stranger to the agricultural arena. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree in agriculture from USP and under a Fulbright scholarship attained her PhD in natural resources and environmental management from the University of Hawaii. She began her professional career as a school teacher at St. Joseph's College, and after obtaining her PhD, she worked for the Solomon Islands National University, juggling her role as an associate dean, head of the agriculture department, and senior lecturer. She has also worked for UNDP, both here in Samoa and the Solomon Islands, and has also worked at FAO in the sub-regional office for the Pacific Islands. With her wealth of experience and academic background in the agricultural sector, Dr. Sulifoa currently holds the position of ACEO for the Agriculture Sector Coordination Division, which also involves coordinating sector work, but several projects inclusive of the Samoa Agriculture and Fisheries Productivity and Marketing Project, or SAFRA. SAFRA is a project co-funded by the World Bank and the International Fund for Agriculture Development, which aims to increase agriculture and fisheries production and productivity and market access. And last, but certainly not the least, she will join us as soon as she is able, Litara Kerina Taulealo, who is the ACEO for the Climate Resilience Investments and Coordination Division of the Ministry of Finance. Litara has served Samoa in its finance sector for over 20 years. She hails from the village of Mota'a and is a graduate from the University of Wollongong, Sydney, Australia, with a Bachelor of Commerce as well as a postgraduate certificate in Projects and Management Development from the University of Bradford, UK. Ms. Taulealo is currently the ACEO for the Climate Resilience Investments and Coordination for the Ministry of Finance. Without further ado, let's now move on to our leadership dialogues for today. Stockholm Plus 50 has provided us the platform to engage in these much needed conversations. And before we can talk about what needs to be done to ensure our future, let's first and foremost reflect upon what urgent needs for action we can consider to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all. I'd like to direct the first question to none other than the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Lawafionga Leale Salanoa, can you please reflect and share with us all on how we can restore and regenerate a positive relationship with nature? And in doing so, if you can also provide some good practices and pathways that you would like to see scaled up to enable a move to a healthy planet. Lawafionga, over to you.
Talofa, aftaitele atu, Madam Moderator, for the kind introduction. I would also like to acknowledge Leafionga ya Lepale, ya Mulana Saunoanga, Amatalia ile tato po kalame nei tai au. Pleasant good morning also to my fellow panelists. Very good to see you, Dr. Ramona. Yeah, and I think very shortly we'll be able to have another very good colleague of mine, Ms. Litara, to join us in these discussions. I would like to also thank UNDP for the excellent facilitation of the national consultations. I have been able to follow some of the discussions that we've had with other key major groups in our efforts, in our environmental development efforts. So big fat malo to the team. So, and I think it's kind of a challenge to narrow down to just 2 or 3 good practices. But before I do that, you know, we, the government and the people of Samoa have done a lot in the many years with regards to the protection and conservation of the environment. And we see this in the many, many very good initiatives that we have in place. And the fact that we have also been able to grow in strength in terms of engagement with our partners has also very much assisted the government, in particular the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, in pushing forward our environment agenda. So if based on that experience and the work that we've been doing, if I were to identify or just to prioritize 2 or 3 good practices and pathways that we would like to see scaled up to enable a healthy planet, we would like to see, as we are seeing now, you know, more attention given to nature-based solutions. And I think with what the whole world is going through at the moment, with the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of restrictions have been put in place. People have turned to nature-based solutions, and we see this. And I know that there's been a lot of discussions in the region on reinforcing or encouraging or promoting nature-based solutions as a form of recovery from the impacts of COVID-19. Another important area that we would like to see scaled up and a lot of attention given to it, and I think we are receiving a lot of attention, is the sustainable management or the sound management of waste and control of pollution. As small island developing states, we do not have that much land available. And we only have 2 landfills at the moment. So if we are to carry on with how things are at the moment, it would mean that we will have to look for alternative sites for landfill purposes. And already the ministry or the government is looking into this. But in order for us to scale up our efforts and really, really reduce, you know, waste that shouldn't be ending up in landfills, practicing sustainable waste management initiatives, I think this will allow us to ensure that our waste, and not just solid waste, but also our chemicals and hazardous waste, are managed properly, and that pollution is controlled. Earlier on the week, and this was something that I heard coming across from other key partners, in particular the private sector, and this is something that the government is also looking into, is promoting sustainable energy, where the focus is currently on renewable energy and energy efficiency. Now, we have a lot of work currently taking place in this space. And I think for us to really see a healthy planet moving forward is that we really need to look at phasing out fossil fuels and increase opportunities to foster sustainable energy, in particular renewable energy, safe and affordable renewable energy alternatives. We look at food security, again, healthy planet. It's important that our people have access to food, good nutrition. So of course, one of the things that we would like to see scaled up, and I think also the government has put in a lot of investment in this together with our development partners, and this is to do with sustainable agriculture, promoting sustainable farming techniques, farming or management of cattle, livestock, promoting integrated pest management techniques or practices that are environmentally friendly. And I would also like to note that we work very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. And in this space where we are really trying to make sure that whilst we are hoping for increased productivity in the agriculture sector, we would also like to make sure that this development is sustainable, and that we're able to manage and making sure that we are not increasing pollution in terms of the pesticides or herbicides that we'll be using. So of course, emphasis on organic farming, agricultural practices like sustainable agricultural practices like agroforestry and so forth are some of the main activities that we work very closely on to promote. And this also came across from the speaker from the Sasafa'a. Forestation programs, and I'm sorry this is going beyond the two, but I think it's very important that from a planetary perspective, that we all focus on replanting programs. Now, so imagine having a global tree planting campaign, and given the current population, we have more than 7 billion people. So if everyone was to plant a tree, I think that would be a great contribution, a personal contribution to the health of the planet overall. And I would like to make note that even for our governments, we are now pushing forward to launch another campaign following the success of the 2 million tree planting campaign, in which we are hoping to launch the 3 million tree planting campaign later on this month. So those are just some of the key or good practices that we would like to see scaled up to ensure that we have a healthy planet. Thank you.
Your reflections touched upon quite a lot of very good practices that we want to see scaled up. In particular, you mentioned waste management, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and food security. I would now like to hand over the opportunity to Dr. Ramona from the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. Would you like to also make a contribution towards the reflections that Leali Salanoa has shared? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Fatalo fatu letato our fonofonita. Pleasant good morning to everyone. I think from the agriculture's perspective, these, back to good agriculture practices, and I'll elaborate more on it during the second dialogue, but it is very critical, particularly when we're trying to push for increased production. As you will notice in our SAFPROM project, it's important to increase production, but we shouldn't do it at the expense of our environment. So making sure that we are sustaining production, because we need to consider not only what we need today, but we need to make sure that we leave behind these resources for the next generation, and that's true sustainability. So all the practices that have been mentioned, we can classify them as good agriculture practices. Organic agriculture is one of them. Are certain areas that we should be encouraging and coming up with policies to really push for these forward, to ensure that we do achieve true sustainable agriculture production. Just my 5 cents worth to the discussions.
Baftai, Dr. Ramona, now you have both talked about good practices without impacting our environment unnecessarily. Now, when we talk about scaling up, from an MNRE or MAF perspective, how can we safeguard the rights of people and nature, including, among others, our Samoan indigenous peoples, local communities, women, youth, and future generations in the context of trying to scale up these good practices that you have reflected upon? Lawa Fionga Lale Salanoa.
Thank you. I think that's a very important question. It's important that whilst we have been able to identify these key practices that we need to scale up, it's important also for us from a government perspective to have or to create the right environment or enabling environment that's conducive to upscaling these very important practices. So in saying that, governance arrangements from the role of government will need to be in place to allow for upscaling, and something that that was also mentioned by one of our groups, I think that was yesterday, was transitioning of many of these good practices in terms of upscaling. So that's also very crucial, and which is why we need to have the proper enabling environment in place. And in doing so, our role as government then will have to ensure that we have the appropriate policy frameworks that are responsive and inclusive to the varied needs of the population. This was something that also came across strongly from our groups. Now, I mentioned before that for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, a lot has been done since the 1990s, and that we have signed up to many multilateral environmental agreements, and we have quite an extensive policy framework in place. We have a lot of legislation also being drafted and currently in force. So these are crucial for us to allow for an environment that is conducive to upscaling. So we have legislative and institutional reforms, very critical. Now, in order for us to make sure that we are able to upscale, we need to have the proper institutions in place. We need also to have coordination structures or mechanisms in place that will facilitate networking, coordination, collaboration, networking between partners. And I'm not just talking about government here. So I'm talking about coordination structures that reach beyond government and will take up and bring to the table, or us going outside to be able to fully engage our stakeholders, the private sector, essential for upscaling some of these practices, if not all. Private sector plays a crucial role. We have our different NGOs, our community-based organizations. We have our vulnerable groups. So it's very essential that we have coordination mechanisms in place, because that will then ensure the inclusivity of everybody in the planning, implementation, and monitoring aspect of the work. Now, in saying that, again, many of the panelists in previous forums have talked about the need to have a whole of government approach, the need to ensure a whole of society approach. And these are extremely crucial to upscaling. So ensuring that we have a holistic and multi-sectoral approach. And I make an example of where we are with government sector planning reforms. And this is where I have a bit more experience, having been a coordinator for the water and sanitation program and the environment program, where government has institutionalized coordination structures to make sure everybody comes to the table. And I, for one, can attest to to how powerful having this mechanism in place, because then we hear the voices of the private sector, we hear the voices of NGOs, we hear the voices of communities, of course. Going way back, this is what we have been doing. We have been consulting our stakeholders, our members of communities. So building on to that work, where we have come to this stage where government is saying, where government has improved further our engagement processes. So again, other key aspects of having this enabling environment in place and having the ability to be able to monitor and evaluate on track with the promises that we are making, with the priorities and how we're faring from time to time. Capacity building is crucial, because unless we provide an environment to ensure that there's capacity development, to ensure everybody is trained with the right skills, then transitioning to, in terms of upscaling of these good practices, would be very limited. So these are, I think, some crucial aspects of providing, pardon me, of providing that enabling environment. And I just want to mention one small, well, not small, but one last thing: sustainable financing. And this has everything to do with sustainability of the of everything that we're doing. I think I mentioned earlier that we have signed up to a number of multilateral environmental agreements. Pardon me. And that we have done so much over the years. Now, one of the things that we have also learned, the project modality, sustainability is very much hindered by the financing mechanisms that we have in place. And for example, we have the traditional discrete project approach, and where we are now with programmatic, funding or financing, where we have sector planning reforms, where we've been able to identify our priorities and using that program to leverage for development funding. And I say, for example, our experience with the European Union through sector budget support. Now, this allowed so much flexibility. This allowed also for government to build and strengthen its systems and policies financially, that to me personally, this really enhanced sustainability of many of the initiatives that we have been doing under the water and sanitation sector, for example, post-funding. And it's something that I would challenge our development partners out there to really think about programming or programmatic approaches or budget support instead of the traditional project approach. It's good, I'm not saying it's not, but in terms of sustainability, in terms of flexibility, in terms of enhancing government ownership of the programs that we're doing, then perhaps we need to look very carefully to adopting budget support type modalities. So sustainable financing, very crucial if we are to provide that enabling environment that would then ensure we're able to upscale these key initiatives for the benefit of the whole planet. Thank you.
Thank you for your insights, Lawa Fionga. Dr. Ramona, would you like to make any contributions in terms of what has been shared from Leali Salanoa's reflections?
Just to add on from the agriculture perspective, I think Lale Salanoy has given a very holistic view of, moving forward in terms of sustainability. But the idea, that holistic approach is very much needed. And we see it within our own sector as well, that we could be a lot more proactive in terms of bringing together all the stakeholders to solve a problem. That includes the scientists, the research institutions, university problem, like we're talking about the problems of like the chemicals, yeah. There needs to be a lot more focus on specific problems to come up with those solutions so that we can move forward with more sustainable practices in going forward. Otherwise, it's kind of like a repetition of the same problems, because we're not really focused and we're not bringing together those stakeholders that need to come and focus on a specific problem and try and come up with those solutions. So just adding on to that there is also that need for more proactiveness from within the specific ministries as well, from that sector coordination perspective, to kind of bring everyone together into this role. But again, that budget support is very much needed and also critical, because we know that after a specific project, for a certain number of years, you're not going to see true impact. It takes time for these impacts to be seen, and it takes time to truly convince, from the agriculture perspective, farmers that this is going to work for them. If it's not going to help the farmer increase their production and income, then it's very hard for us to try and get them to adopt certain ideas, or change certain practices. So everything needs to go in hand. That holistic approach needs to be there. At the end of the day, it's always about the end product, which is the farmers benefiting, the environment benefiting from the actions that we take. So just adding on to that.
Baftai, Dr. Ramona. Now, allow me to just finish off our leadership dialogue 1. You have both reflected that one of the crucial structures that needs to be in place is an enabling environment, in terms of having the legislative frameworks in place, having multilateral agreements, and also having that holistic approach in terms of networking and sector coordination, as just some of the crucial structures and policies in place to not only safeguard the rights of our people and nature, but also some of the actions that need to take place in order for practices to be scaled up. Now, in terms of the reflections that we have shared to date, what would be the new or prioritized set of metrics and indicators needed for tracking our progress towards a healthier and more prosperous planet, given the policies and structures that are in place as reflected upon by your good selves? Over to you.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I apologize if I've taken up too much of the space here. But just very quickly, yes, I think we should maintain our metrics or indicators on poverty and hardship, resilience, and this is a measure of the resilience of our planet. Health indicators, we have them already. They need to be continue to be prioritized. Access to basic services like drinking water, safe hygiene, sanitation, gender inequality, disaster-related indicators, and then of course measure of the health of the planet. And I'm talking again the holistic here. When we talk about the planet, we're not just talking about the environment. So with all those, and then we look at measuring the health of the environment, we have the global environmental outlook reports that are produced by UNEP, And then we also have geo reports at the regional level, and this is the work of SPREP. And then at the national level, we have state of the environment reports, and these reports will then try and measure how healthy our environment is. For example, our ocean health, water, land, forest, biodiversity. So they're very important, crucial indicators for us to continue to measure. And I mentioned waste, and we really need to look at promoting and reinforcing measuring production and consumption patterns. Are they sustainable? How do we measure the sustainability of our production and consumption patterns on waste and pollution? Just some of the key things that I believe are also linked to what I have identified in terms of the good practices we need to upscale. Thank you.
Dr. Ramona, for your final contributions.
I think from, if we're looking at from the agriculture perspective, some indicators very specific to agriculture would be, rather than measuring in terms of increased production, we should be looking at perhaps areas of reduction in chemical usage by farmers, or areas increased in agroforestry. The number of women that are now involved in agriculture, these kind of ideas, maybe adding in some of these indicators to make it more specific to a sector as well, which will in turn contribute to the overall SDGs, the government plans, and also to our SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramona. This now brings us to the end of our Leadership Dialogue 1. Just for the information of our panelists and our participants, unfortunately, our third speaker is still trying to patch in. There seems to be a nationwide technical difficulty happening, and this must be because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So while we await for her to try her best to patch in, let us now move on to Leadership Dialogue 2. Now, we all know that COVID-19 has erased a lot of progress made on the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, but it has also given us a sort of reset button. Now, what actions could be taken for achieving a sustainable and inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic? And under this Leadership Dialogue 2, I would now like to direct my first question to Dr. Ramona. What are the most promising, sustainable, and inclusive recovery practices from the perspective of agriculture and fisheries that's currently being applied by the public sector and governments at the community and country level, and how can we scale them up given the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. For this first question, I'll speak on behalf of the work that was done by the ministry to address the issue of COVID-19 when it first came out. And with the impacts of COVID-19, the first response of the government of Samoa through the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries was on the food security side, with 94% of the population being completely dependent, or to some degree dependent on agriculture. This was very important to ensure that we had food in the country. It was also important because there were predictions on delayed shipments of food into Samoa during this time. Therefore, our focus, or the focus of the ministry, was really to encourage households to grow food for themselves and for their families. And this response resulted in the ministry with its donor partners, providing support to the communities through several stimulus packages, such as distributing livestock, seeds, planting materials to farmers, and also supporting our fishers with equipment that they needed, just to ensure that everyone was food secure during this time. So it was an immediate support. And there was also this focus to making sure that both men and women and youth, everyone was involved in the support as much as possible through all the stimulus packages and initiatives that were implemented. Now, what was seen during the COVID-19, it really brought out how dependent our economy, Samoa's economy was on tourism and also on remittances. And it brought to light just how important agriculture and fisheries was, and the need to refocus the attention on agriculture so that in the future, there was this a more consistent support to the agriculture sector. Now it's good. The priority is on agriculture now, in terms of ensuring food security. But don't forget that we also need to make sure that we have nutrition security that goes hand in hand with this. And going back to what Nyali Seleno was talking about earlier about making sure that there's a holistic approach. Prioritizing agriculture is important, but again, we need to make sure that there are no long-term consequences to the environment, because if it's not done sustainably, we will have issues going forward. Perhaps one of the most pressing resources that we need to focus our attention on is our soils. It's very important to take care of our soils because it is its capacity to function as that living ecosystem, which enables us to sustain our plant and animal growth. Therefore, it's important that we look at it from a sustainability point of view. And we need to ensure that our soils remain healthy for today, as well as our current generations. So everything that we do, we should never take for granted that, at the expense of what our actions today will cost our future generations. So on that note, there were several organizations that were working with the ministry to truly help us sustain soil health. And there are practices such as sustainable agriculture practices from agroforestry, from regenerative agriculture, natural farming methods such as organic agriculture, with integrated pest management, as well as conservation agriculture. So we've got some few farmers organizations that are working on this. However, if you see our latest census, there's still 41% of our farmers that are using chemicals. So there is still quite a proportion of the population of farming people that are very much dependent on agriculture due to labor shortages, and also just trying to make sure that production is increased for export markets. So with that, there is that need for a push towards scaling up these good agriculture practices. And as I've said earlier, it's important that we try and ensure that the farmers are able to see the benefits of these good practices for them, for the environment, so that they can help them to increase their income in the future. And to make money, but at the same time, it shouldn't cost the environment. So scaling these good practices up does require that holistic approach that Leila Salane was talking about, with donors, the government, everyone coming together to really look at these alternative practices, good agriculture practices, and supporting the local farming communities to adopt these ideas for the longer term sustainability of our soils as well as our environment. Thank you.
Faftai, Dr. Ramona, just bear with me for a little while I try and expand a little bit further on the reflections that you have shared upon in terms of talking about the importance of food security since the COVID-19 pandemic, and how important it is, especially as we start to encourage subsistence farming at the home level, also looking at nutrition and soil health, and that one of the key highlights from the pandemic is that it is important to refocus back on agriculture and fisheries. Now, to expand upon our conversations, how do we then ensure that all the communities in Samoa can benefit from the opportunities under food security, nutrition, and refocusing on agriculture and fisheries, stemming from the sustainable and just transition as part of our COVID-19 recovery. Over to you, Dr. Ramona.
Thank you. Just to add on to this, I think that holistic approach that CEO for MNRE was talking about is very critical and something that we really need to look at in order to be able to fully support our local communities. We noticed that there's a lot of donor support coming through the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries for our farmers and our fishers. There needs to be a tailoring of this support to truly fit the needs of our farmers and our fishers. So essentially, the support needs to be realistic and contextualized to meet the needs of the recipient, a funding country, or the, at the end of the day, the farmers and fishers. This is to try and avoid the issues of implementing certain activities that don't quite meet the need of the country or the farmer and the fisher, but rather, to achieve an objective of an external objective. So therefore, it's important for all these funding that comes in to be streamlined to the needs of the farmers and fishers, as well as the national priorities, to be very focus it and make it very country specific. So I think the key word here is to have it streamlined, contextualized, so that if you're wanting these practices to be scaled up to support the local communities, then that support has to come and be tailored to their needs, and not to an overall objective, external objective that needs to be achieved, but rather very specific to the needs of the beneficiaries. In this case, from the agriculture perspective, the local farmer and the fishers.
Thank you, Dr. Ramona. Lawafionga Leale Salanoa, in your previous reflections, you also touched upon food security and how important it is that any progress made towards, we need to be looking at nature-based solutions. I now open up the floor for your contributions and interventions with regards to our conversations that we've had under leadership dialogue too. Lawafionga.
Madam Moderator, Dr. Ramona. We, as part of the GCF project, we work very closely with community-based funding organizations, and we only do have one, but we have two. There's the Small Grants Program, and then we have the CSSP, Civil Society Support Program. Now, we, under the CSSP program, we have been able to approve more than 500 projects to date. And the majority of these projects provide some very good examples of what I mean by nature-based solutions. And we talk about food security, and we've been rolling this out for going on 2 to 3 years now. And with the pandemic now, we have seen some very successful stories coming through from many of our households. And these households have been identified as vulnerable households. So through this particular project, we have been able to provide opportunities for families to improve their nutrition, right? Improve their nutrition and improve food security. And we work very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture in this respect. So, and we see there's discussions coming through at the regional level of many of our counterparts also looking at nature-based solutions. We've been able to fund small gardens, vegetable gardens. So in doing so, we've been able to improve the livelihood of particular households, vulnerable households. So yes, it's a very good opportunity for us and the government, working very closely with its partners to encourage and promote nature-based solutions. And we've been able to do that. That we have the Jeff-funded Small Grants Program also taking a very strong role in.
Moving on to our next question, and I asked this for both of you, like what would be decent green jobs of the future and what are the new skills needed, not only from our people, but especially from the government perspective? Thank you. Dr. Ramona, if you would like to open up our discussions.
Sorry. Sorry about that. No, thank you very much for that question. I was just trying to think, what sort of green jobs for the future. And in my mind, because I'm very passionate about agriculture, it's always about agriculture, promoting agriculture as a career path to future generations. I mean, if you see agriculture, you would see it as a lot of work being involved in the field, but it's not just about that. We need more people in agriculture research areas, and I think this is an area where if there are future generations out there wanting to get into the agriculture as a career, research in agriculture, we need more minds doing research on how we can improve our farming practices, how we can better diffuse these ideas into communities so that at the end of the day, the communities benefit from the work that is being done, the ideas that are being generated. So we need more scientists in the agriculture sector, really pushing for these, solution to the problems that we have. So just some areas, that's one of the areas that comes to the top of my mind at this point. Thank you.
For your intervention.
Thank you. And like Dr. Ramona, yes, we need scientists. We have so many planners, strategic, policy analysts, but what we really need are scientists. And I think there's been a lot of government attention to try and promote science in schools. I think we're also seeing a lot more students taking a keen interest in taking up science subjects, so this is all good. We have quite a number of students coming back with environment type or environment related degrees. Some of them have been able to further and come back with masters. We do have what we would like to see more PhD, like Dr. Ramona. But the key areas that we would like to see our science, children focusing on, renewable energy, and this is something that, clearly came across in the discussions, renewable energy. And if we are to upscale, these practices, these best practices in terms of sustainable energy, waste, how we deal with our waste, solid waste, chemicals, and hazardous waste. We look also at the science, of what else did I mention earlier? We look at tourism. So we need people, ecologists. We need ecologists. So we need to make sure that we provide an opportunity for our students to be able to take up more science-based subjects. And I thought it was very interesting to hear Okalani yesterday talk about her experience going through our education system. And she rightly pointed out, you fight for how many scholarship opportunities that are available and how many students are all vying for these opportunities. So perhaps it's something that we government need to look into, to have more opportunities to expand on the skills, scientific skills that we need to include renewable energy. And so our students have access to that. So yes, I would like to see more of that. And I think Dr. Ramona has very clearly also laid out the scientific needs of the agriculture sector.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome on board our third panelist, Litara Taulealo. I'm glad that technical difficulties is over. You've just joined while we are closing up our leadership dialogue too. And just to allow you some time to settle in before we start hitting you with some of the questions with regards to finances and so forth, I would just like to open up the floor to all our three panelists, Lauafionga Lali Salanoa and Dr. Ramona. The final question for our leadership dialogue too is that we've been talking about commitments and responsible principles in all our previous reflections. Now my question is, what needs to be some of these key commitments and responsible principles for our key industry sectors, especially in terms of the finance and investment institutions, especially when put in the context of scaling up our good practices, looking at the holistic approach, as well as a holistic coordination. What would be some of the commitments and responsible principles that need to be made by our key industry sectors and by finance and investment institutions? Over to you, Dr. Ramona, to open up our discussions. And then we will move on to Lauafionga Leali Salanoa. And Litara, once you are ready, we will have you close off our leadership dialogue too with your interventions.
Thank you, moderator. I think, from the agriculture perspective, we see that is important to the economy. The agriculture are also very high. And I'll speak from the farmers and fishers perspective. There's very limited funding opportunities available for our farmers and fishers. And where funding opportunity does exist, the interest rates that they have to pay are very high. And it's also very difficult for a lot of our farmers and fishers to access funding opportunities out there to push them to that next level of from subsistence to more semi-commercial and commercial farmer. So, I think there needs to be a step back and a relook at how the funding is, or funding opportunities are provided for our farmers. We've mentioned earlier these good agriculture practices, and Leali Salanoa was talking about, organic farming, and we also have, conservation agriculture practices. We have regenerative agriculture. These are all concepts that perhaps if funding opportunities could be made easier for farmers to access, for them to be able to move towards, to support them to move towards these sustainable practices rather than just encouraging them to increase production, but more encouragement and more funding support given for sustainable practices so that we can reduce the number of chemical usage by farmers. And this again goes back to that holistic approach. That approach needs to be there, because while we have these great ideas, trying to convince a farmer that it's good for them will take time. It really does take time. So you need to be able to provide the alternatives for farmers. And that's where the sector comes in, with the scientists and with all the necessary stakeholders to come up with those solutions to show farmers that this will work for them and it will be sustainable for them, not just for now, increasing their income now, but also ensuring that the environment, that the soils remain intact, remain sustainable for the current generation as well as the next generation. So I guess from the agriculture perspective, I'm talking from the farmers' perspective and also the fishers in terms of that access to financing. And so perhaps if there can be a real look at that, at channeling funding and making this funding easier to access, for farmers to easily access this, to encourage the, going into sustainable agriculture practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, building on what Dr. Ramona has already mentioned. And again, I reiterate the importance of trusted partnerships between government and industries and other groups, other key stakeholders, and even between government and development partners. Environmental sustainability is a crucial consideration in terms of, in terms of the many developments that we are looking at or considering. Looking at participatory processes, also very important, and making sure that everybody's included. And I think this is coming across very strongly in terms of the inclusiveness of the work that we're doing. And again, going back to that holistic approach. And then with regards to the interaction between government and partners, development partners to be specific, I think there needs to be a very clear understanding that governments, they always need to be able to lead, that they should always be in the driving seat of any development that we are, and that to me reinforces ownership at the national level. And when we have ownership at the national level, and that of course will ensure that we have a stronger engagement of our communities. Making use of existing structures, and again, I go back to the importance of having coordination between partners. For us to be able to remain true to ensuring a holistic approach, we need to coordinate, we need to collaborate, we need to network. So, and again, when we have strong networks in place, that in itself will guarantee sustainability of many of our efforts. So just very briefly to contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Over to our representative from the Ministry of Finance, Litara. Would you like to make an intervention with regards to what should be some of the key commitments and responsible principles that need to be made by the finance and investment institutions? Over to you, Litara. We are unable to hear you, Litara Fatmon Mole. If you can turn up your audio.
Is it okay now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear now? Okay. I'll just be quick given the difficulties. So taking in account the comments made by Dr. Ramona and Nele Salanua. I think at this time, there is more commitment needed by the institutions as part of the recovery. Our new development plan also highlights in detail the importance of our environments in that go together with the other aspects of sustainable development, such as social infrastructure. In light of this, so the new pathway for the development of Samoa incorporates these key areas given the challenges of the pandemic that we experience. It has also made us turn inwards in a way, moving towards, as Ramona and Nele Salanoa mentioned, food security, sustainable agriculture. We have seen more interest in this during the pandemic for us. But also what Ramona mentioned in sustainable agriculture, like for example, some families may just plant cabbages, and that affects the soil, and we have to really work well with the communities to say maybe you should you practice crop rotation or veggies rotation so that you keep the health of the soil. Fran also mentioned the importance of sustainable financing, and I reiterate my support for this, given that the environment sector plan has been supported by numerous discrete projects. While they are of great support, we feel that sustainable, flexible, and a financing modality that reduces the administration costs to the government or to the counterpart who works in the area is of more effective and efficient use of financing, and the counterparts or the government are better able to incorporate these in the long run into their usual programs and national projects. A new, as part of also the new National Development Plan, there is the push towards a district development, where communities will take much more ownership in the development of their district, villages, or communities. So we are also seeing where the existing institutional arrangements, frameworks, and ways of accessing funding will be better catered towards this new way of doing things at the community level. Dr. Ramona also mentioned the access to farmers. at the national level, we've been trying to push accreditation of some of our institutions that focus on farmers, but I don't see that coming into fruition in the near term. But Lealai Salanoa also spoke on the civil society support program as part of one of our GCF projects. The first round of calls for proposals, it was a lot of the feedback we got was that it was very complex and complicated. People just did not feel that the form, they would be able to access supports from the forms that were available. So in the next round of calls for proposals, MNRE and the project team were able to simplify, well, made much less difficult the proposal form that applicants had to fill in, with the support of some of our NGOs that was contracted to be able to support vulnerable families access this support. So, yeah, I think with the way.
You know, just to provide a summary from your intervention, it sounds like in terms of some of the key commitments and principles that we need to take into consideration towards the finance and investment institutions is, number one, we need to look at screening the projects. So not only are they sustainable in terms of financial commitments, but so they are also sustainable in terms of environmental health. And we also need to consider looking at reducing administrative costs, not only for the government, but whoever is the beneficiaries of these projects. And you have mentioned something across the line of district development where we want to increase the ownership of our villages and communities so that they are better able to manage and take on the sustainable development of district development plans and projects. I take this opportunity to beg the indulgence of our panelists. I have just been made aware that due to competing priorities, Litara will be unable to stay with us for the full panelist dialogue. So if you can just give me just 10 more minutes of your time before we go for our break, I would just like to direct some very specific questions to Litara as the representative of the Ministry of Finance. Litara Fatmon Mole, just in terms of looking at accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the decade of action. Given the role of the Ministry of Finance in setting our national budgets and monitoring of government spending, what measures, other than what you have already mentioned, are needed to align public, private, and development finance with existing commitments and priorities? And when mentioning these measures, can you also expand upon how we can transform governance and legal systems that maintain long-term economic stability and ecological and social well-being for all? Over to you, Litara, for your interventions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think on the first question, much more important now is the partners, especially the partners with special interest in seeing the implementation of the environment dimension of sustainable development. Now it is much more important for them to support Samoa accelerate this. We have multiple challenges. We are at the moment trying to finalize our budget for the next financial year. So our pathway for the development of Samoa would align all of the interests in supporting this area for Samoa. I say the importance right now of partners with special interest and preferably sustainable financing in the form of budget support for the environment sector plan because of the challenges faced by national budgets in the aftermath or whatever of COVID and the challenges in increase in prices with the events in other parts of the world. So governments now also with the decrease in revenue since the closure of borders, etc. The parts that our partners play in this area is very much important now while the government tries to focus program on the most vulnerable sectors or people in the communities at this stage. In our other panelists also mentioned the governance and legal systems that are in place. The systems already exist, but given the challenges we face now, there is room for strengthening true partnerships, not only with our partners, but with our communities, most especially now in this area, given that they would take much more responsibilities for the developments in their local areas.
Baftaili, Tara, if I could just try and expand our discussions a little bit more in terms of economic stability. From a finance perspective, what would be an action that we can look at to transform economic stability within our financial sector? Baftai, over to you.
Okay, some of the actions that that the government has implemented to try and reduce the economic impacts of the pandemic especially to the business in the key sectors that have been majorly impacted. Yeah, for example, is tourism. So in the tourism sector, the temporary unemployment benefits, the stimulus to the hotels, stimulus to businesses. There was also, so stimulus to businesses, and then some of the other reduction in the cost of doing businesses. So that was some of the temporary measures that were done to try and reduce that economic impact of the COVID. We also all know that Samoa was not in extensive lockdown like other countries. So that is another measure to try and reduce the impact of the economic impact, is to reduce the time that we have total lockdowns.
Thank you very much, Litara, for your interventions, given that you had a lot of technical difficulties trying to patch into today's dialogue. I now take this opportunity to let everyone know, especially our panelists, we will now be taking a short break from our discussion, and we would like to invite the participants to take up the State of the Planet Global Public Survey. Your answers are anonymous, and the survey takes only about 5 minutes to complete. The survey results will be taken up to the Stockholm Plus 50 international meeting. So it is very important that you all participate in this survey so that our national voices can be elevated to the international platform that will be held in Sweden from the 2nd to the 3rd of June, 2022. Thank you in advance for participating in the Global Public Survey. To our panelists who will remain until the end of our dialogue, thank you very much for your patience. We will now take a bio break of 10 minutes, and we will be back at around 11:40 a.m. So please take the time to get yourself a refreshment, have your bio break, and also the opportunity to get ready for the many questions that our participants have started hitting us on our Q&A and chat box. So when we come back from our 10-minute break, we will open up the floor for our Q&A to address and respond to some of the concerns raised by our participants. Thank you very much, and see you soon in 10 minutes. To our participants, please stay online, take part in the survey, and keep an ear out for when we come back.
Under our matching grants program in the SAFPROM project, we do not allow the procurement of any chemicals that are banned by the World Health Organization, approved under here. And this discourages the farmers from buying paraquats. We also have measures in place where within the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, where if you are going to buy paraquat, you need a permit for you to be able to procure this. Now, in terms of a complete ban, this is something that will take needs a policy direction in order to have this, and you need the data to really support that ban. And I think this is something that is there needs to be a move towards this. At the same time, the ministry needs to be able to provide alternative methods of farming the alternative from the current conventional, using herbicides to more organic, natural, regenerative methods. And this is going to take a little bit of time, and there needs to be that push towards that from the policy direction. And, you know, to make that complete transition, the farmer has to observe that the alternative method is going to benefit them. And this is where we as a ministry need to perhaps take a more proactive role in that, in taking this out. And I'll give an example of some of the work that we're now doing. We have some of our farmers under the matching grants program. They have huge areas of taro production. One of these farmers can plant 10,000 taro per week. That's a lot of taro production. And he uses chemicals. And we could see that there was this, he was moving more and more towards his the natural forests. Yeah. So under the program, this is where we need to provide that alternative to the farmer. So this particular farmer is willing to work with us to try cover cropping on an acre of land and, you know, see how that works for him. And if we can convince this commercial farmer that this cover cropping is going to help his soil and save him money, at the same time, he's still going to achieve good taro yields and sustainable taro yields. If we can convince this farmer, this will be the key to convincing the other little farmers that are coming on board, because chemicals are expensive. So the alternative has to be cheaper and sustainable for their soils, at the same time yielding good taro for exports. And this is something that the ministry is working towards under its current projects, because we do take, we do want, you know, more sustainable soils. And one of the ways, from my personal view, is to try and reduce the use of chemicals. Thank you.
Laura Fionga Dali Salano, if you would also like to make an intervention.
Yes, thank you again, Madam Moderator, and it's great to be home and be able to change. Unfortunately, this is our last session. I would have hoped for another session so I can also showcase some of the passion. But I would like to acknowledge the response from Dr. Ramona, and I myself and Dr. Ramona have been talking about this. I mentioned earlier that we are working very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. We want to make sure that there's sustainable agriculture, because we do acknowledge that our people, you know, food security is very important. So in that regard, I am hearing what Dr. Ramona is saying, and we have had some discussions on the side on the fact that at this moment we're not able to measure the impact that these chemicals are having, you know, on the environment, and whether the extent to which such an impact is affecting our people, the health of our people. And this is because we do not have the research. We do not have the research to give us the answers. And this is something that we need, and something that I think government, together with our partners, will need to invest in resources to allow us to do this research. Because whatever findings, whatever outcomes of that research, you know, this will help us to make that policy change and give the recommendation to government to do something that will protect not only the health of our people, but food security. I mean, we can produce lots of taro and have lots of taro at our disposal, but health is also another critical aspect that we need to take into account. So we've been doing a lot of discussion, and this is something that we are both looking into. I would also like to make note that we are talking with SROS, and part of this big plan for us to target chemicals and hazardous waste is to start somewhere. I mean, we got to start somewhere. So we're working very closely with our SROS, and we're going to start with collecting, you know, the chemicals that our labs are using. We have our school labs, we have the hospital, we have even agriculture also, they would have some chemicals that they're using. So we are going to go out and collect them, because at the moment we're not doing life cycle management of these chemicals. You know, chemicals that we're bringing in, that we're using, how are we disposing them? And if we are going to collect them, where are we going to store them? And then shipping them outside of Samoa. So that's the bigger plan that we have at the moment. But to start somewhere, we're working very closely with Ross to target the chemicals that our school labs are using. So we're also trying to work very closely with the Ministry of Education, Sports and Culture. So, and it is our dream to have more research in this area, so we can not only do we provide food for our people, but healthy, nutritious, safe food that our children can enjoy and our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you both for your insights. Now, I'd like to move us along to our oceans and how important the health of our oceans are. One of our questions raised by our participants is, despite the government's attempt to ban the selling of miniature-sized fish, including specific species of fishes, there is still a lot of this seen on the roadside. What has been done about this? Dr. Ramona, over to you, and then Lauafionga Leali Salanoa.
Thank you, moderator. This is a challenge for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. You know, there's a lot of awareness programs that are currently being carried out on the size of fish that's allowed to be sold, but still this issue keeps arising. So recently, and I'm not sure whether I think towards the end of last year or earlier this year, the ministry is taking a stand on this and are now prosecuting some of these fishes that keep, after so many warnings, they keep selling undersized marine products. So it is a serious matter, and the ministry is taking that stand towards that, because if we don't start protecting these resources now, we're not going to have anything left for our future generations. Yes, we understand that there is that need to provide for food today for families, but again, making sure that you have the resources there for the next generation is also very important. So that's critical. And there's a lot of community management plans that encourages reserves, but still there is this issue that we do see in the fish market. So the ministry is taking a stand towards that. Thank you.
Lauafionga Leala.
Just to note that we do work very closely, again, with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries in this regard, towards ocean health, our fishes, our marine resources like our mangroves. So in terms of monitoring, we do work very closely, and this is a long-term partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you for that. Now on to some of our final questions, and this is specific to those who are beneficiaries to grant funding either in the agricultural sector or from an environment project sector. This question is for Dr. Ramona. What has been your experience in terms of best practices via small grant-funded projects being implemented by farmers and village groups on agriculture? Can you name a successful case study and why it was successful? Fatai?
Under our SAFPROM, we have the matching grants program, which allows our beneficiaries to access up to $10,000 to support agriculture production or fisheries for that matter. And we've seen a large number of interest in the program. When we first did a call for or expression of interest, we had about 3,000 beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries apply through. And from that 3,000, it was narrowed down to around 1,300 beneficiaries that were actually eligible, meeting all the criterias of the project. Again, we want to be able to look at the sustainability of these production to ensure that there is food, to ensure that we do have food security in country. And from the working with our farmers in Savai'i, there have been a lot of very great stories coming out. People who genuinely want the support to be able to move their production to the next level. One classic example that stays in my mind is this farmer who has a cattle farm on the hills, and it takes about half an hour to hike up this hill, and no car can reach there. And him and his sons hand carried all these tools up to the hill to try and increase their cattle production so that and also improve their pasture. So just that commitment from the farmers. Another example that comes to mind is a lady from the village of Fa'ala. She's got a very successful cattle farm, and she supplies quite a lot of the meat locally in Savai'i. And through the support that we gave her, she was able to just improve the efficiency of how she produces beef, I guess. So you see all these positive stories coming out from Savai'i, and then you come here to Upolu, which we're starting the disbursements here, and then you come across cases of the farmer that I previously mentioned, where he's willing to make the change. He's willing to try something new in order to help set an example for other smaller farmers. So these are some of the stories that come to my mind when looking at our matching grants program. Bearing in mind it's still in progress, and we are definitely looking forward to more stories to tell from our beneficiaries in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Baftai, Dr. Ramona. My next question is directed to Lawafionga Leali Salanoa. One of our participants has touched upon sand mining that is taking place in some of our villages. And the question is whether there is any frameworks or provisions put in place to ensure that the limits or the standards required to make sand mining sustainable is enforced. And if there is any way where villages can escalate matters in terms of illegal sand mining and so forth.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think I've submitted an answer to that, but I'm happy to further elaborate that yes, we do. We do have a development consent process. We do also have the permitting system in place. So anyone wishing to mine sand will need to apply for a permit. And then we do also have some laws and some fines, but we do find quite a few cases coming through of non-compliance, and we have tried to strengthen our monitoring, and in doing so, we have been able to engage our communities to assist us in monitoring, and most of our communities have been readily reporting many of these non-permitted activities. So one other thing that we have also looked at is developing MOUs with our communities, and some, not all the communities, but we have MOUs with communities where we are working very closely with the village council to enforce laws through their own traditional bylaws. Thank you.
I will now close off our Q&A session. Thank you so much to our participants for engaging with our panelists and for asking us such very crucial questions in terms of the health of our planet and prosperity for all. Now, when we began our discussions and dialogue, we first reflected upon the urgent needs for actions in terms of healthy planet, healthy people. Then we moved on to touch upon the impact of COVID-19 that has on our national interests and so forth. So to close off and complete the loop, we will now look at accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the Decade of Action. So my next question is to both our panelists. What are the biggest challenges we are facing in implementing the commitments to the 2030 Agenda and other environmental commitments? And how do we create an enabling environment for delivery on the ground? Over to our panelists. Feel free to answer, whoever may want to go first.
Madam, okay, I'll go first. From the agriculture perspective, I think, it's important for some form of flexibility of the support that is given in terms of implementing a lot of these projects, work on the ground. The need for contextualization is also very much needed. Contextualized to the needs of our of the farm, the people that we are supporting. In our case, it's the farmers and the fishers, and making sure that when this support is given, it is streamlined to the priorities of the country, so that at the end of the day we can report on the success of these interventions and achieve medium-term impact, because you won't necessarily see the long-term impact until after several years, and an evaluation is done later on. But just making sure that there is that room for flexibility and for allowing the countries, to enable them to contextualize a lot of the support to our farmers and fishers context. Thank you.
Lauafionga Leale Salanoa, over to you for your interventions.
My apologies, Madam Moderator. I did ask for 10 minutes. I needed to excuse myself. And could I ask again that you repeat that question, please?
Absolutely, and no worries. What are the biggest challenges we are facing in implementing the commitments to the 2030 Agenda and other environmental commitments? How do we create an enabling environment for delivery on the ground? Over to you.
Thank you. I think I touched on this from the government perspective earlier on in my talk. I think it's very important that we have the right and enabling environment consisting of the right policy mix, inclusive and responsive to the needs of the current population, but at the same time can also accommodate for the needs of our future generations. So the sustainability aspect. I also made mention of laws, and I think Dr. Ramona also mentioned And this is something that we also feel the difficulty in monitoring, enforcing the laws that we have. So again, you know, it's a challenge, but it doesn't mean we're going to stop. We continue to do this work, and where feasible and where practical, amend or do reforms that will make it more conducive for us to implement these key activities. I mentioned also that the need to make use of existing structures, not only within government, but also our own traditional structures that will help us to fully engage our communities in the conversation. So not just when we are developing plans, but when we are having conversations such as this, that they are part of that dialogue, and that we do planning together, we do designing, we do implementation, we do monitoring. So it's the whole sphere of development, and they need to be included. The voices of our most vulnerable or marginalized groups, very important. They need to be included, and we need to listen. And, you know, having said this, this is not the first time we're having this conversation. This was something that was identified as crucial a long time ago, and we have come a long way. It doesn't mean that we haven't done anything. We have done something. But, you know, we also need to look at ways and gaps that we can improve and strengthen the engagement of everybody else. Sustainable financing, very important. You know, we are a small country, highly vulnerable, small economies of scale, everything small and vulnerable, but we do our best. And this, we need the trusted partnerships of our development partners. The environment sector, as rightly pointed out by my good friend Litara, we've got a number of partners. We are so blessed to have so many partners involved in the program. And we value their input, we value their assistance. They have brought us, they have helped the government to come this far. But then again, you know, looking at lessons learned, what can we learn from, you know, the gaps? How can we move forward better and be able to provide and deliver on these key outcomes, which are very crucial and they need to be done now. So I mentioned budget support, you know, sustainable financing mechanisms. So it's time for us to look at how we can adopt this, and so we can move forward quickly because we do not have much time. So just a few of the things, just reiterating what I mentioned earlier on, but thank you once again, Madam Moderator.
A lot of what you have provided in terms of contributions is very much on point. And now I take this opportunity to ask one final question before closing off our dialogue for today. And basically, given the reflections, the interventions and contributions that you have shared through our webinar today, what kind of follow-up activities would you like to see from Stockholm Plus 50 in addition to sustainable financing? Over to you, panelists. Dr. Ramona, if you would like to go first.
I was still thinking. But it is a good point. But it is a very critical. No, it is a very critical. It's a good question, and something that I think perhaps maybe in terms of you know, consolidating all these ideas, and I'll take what
Sorry, can't hear.
Dr. Ramona, are you still with us? Unfortunately, there has been a break in your audio. Okay. While we just allow a few minutes for Dr. Ramona to come on again, perhaps we can move on to Lawafionga Leale Salanoa in terms of what you follow-up actions you would like to see from Stockholm
Ramona's
Plus
back.
50.
Dr. Ramona's back.
Okay, okay. Okay, Lawafionga.
Sorry
you can
about that.
continue thinking about it. Back to you, Dr. Ramona.
But I think, sorry, but I think it's important that these are actually put into action so that we can move forward with these solutions. Otherwise, it will just be another conversation again in the next 10 years. But putting it all into action and keeping what is our focus, and the focus, it's our farmers, it's our vulnerable communities, keeping them in mind when we talk, when we raise these concerns, and taking the action that's needed to make the change, rather than having value for money, having value for that change. What is the change that we want? What is that long-term impact that we want? So that's my how I see this and how we can perhaps move forward with this conversation. Thank you.
Pavtai, Dr. Ramona, now over to you, Lawafionga Leale Salanoa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramona, for giving me some time to have a bit more thinking about it. So yeah, other than sustainable financing, we do note that in the global space, we have a lot of partners, and many of them have their own requirements, have their own agendas, and you'll find that most, oftentimes you'll see that there's, the global agenda is not exactly seeing eye to eye with the regional and national agenda, right? So and you are so right in pointing out, other than financing, sustainable financing, yes, it's good to have access to financing, but that financing has to match the needs, the priorities of the country. So it's not just about making available the funding, but it's also about accessing that funding, but it's making sure, that the interests of the communities and the countries are prioritized, and they're not dictating their own global agenda. So I think that's something I can share. And we want to see tangible results, and Dr. Ramona is so right. We can talk and talk and talk, but we need to see some action. I think everybody is aware that we do not have much time left, and we look at what's happening with the climate change global agenda and our fight to keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius, ideally below, right? So we're not just fighting this for SIDS, we're fighting this for the whole planet. So we need for everybody to be on board and to take this fight further. It's not just a SIDS fight. It's everybody's fight, and we all need to work together. So yes, I think, it's great to have global attention, and we have multiple partners on board, but making sure that they are listening and they are directing those resources to the exact needs of the countries and communities. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I believe that brings us to a conclusion.
And Dr. Ramona, yes. That wrap-up question is basically, you have provided such in-depth insights and wisdoms, and your closing remarks on the follow-up actions that you would like to see from Stockholm Plus 50 couldn't have been phrased so very well. And we look forward to these follow-up actions at the Stockholm Plus 50. That being said, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our esteemed speakers for being with us and sharing their insights and wisdom. Thank you also to Noe for her sign language translation. Faftai Telelava. I am also grateful for all the participants who have joined us today and for engaging with our panelists either directly through the Q&A chat box or via our generic chat box. Thank you for your questions and for putting our panelists on their toes in making sure that they respond to your key concerns and questions. It has been such a robust dialogue that Leale Salanoa had to provide us with a fashion show so that we can be on our toes this whole morning. It is very much appreciated, and this is the kind of engagement that we look forward to all the time. If today's discussion has inspired you and you too would like to share your opinions about the state of the world's progress towards a sustainable planet, you can do so by registering on the Spark Group page and answering as many questions that you would like under the 3 leadership dialogues. You can also access the recording of this webinar on the Spark Group page and UNDP's social media sites. The link will be provided in our social media and in the chat. Thank you once again for joining us today. I now hand over the closing of our final webinar to the Assistant Resident Representative of UNDP's Environment and Climate Change Unit, Lawafionga Lepale Osi Simanu. Faftai.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Pamalo Faftai, Lawafionga Lale Salanoa, before I love Sunga Dr. Ramona, for that very constructive and engaging dialogue. We heard the discussions. It felt really close to us. It felt really close to us because it touches every aspect of our community lives and everyday life here in the SITS. So we also appreciate the positive vibe, like my colleague, Madam Morita, has touched on. Thank you so much for that positive vibe and change of scenery. It really keeps us glued to our scenes and to our screens. So Fafitai Lavala Fionga Lele Salanoa, Dr. Ramona Sulfoa Fapele Suma Vitara Taulialo. Thank you for the insight and the reflections, the challenges and the aspirations that we want to take forward from the Stockholm Plus 50. I believe that everyone who has joined us today has learned a lot today. I myself have. There's a lot of matters that we discuss. I just want to highlight 2 main ones, is contextualizing and prioritizing the needs of the people and the need for research, the science part. So yes, that is a very, very good points and perspectives that we have to take forward as part of the Stockholm Plus 50. So Fafitai Lava Ilua Fioma, Fafitai to the panel. Fafitai in a way, it's always a pleasure to have you as our sign language. And last but not least, Fafitai Te Lava Taimalangi, our moderator for today. Thank you for that wonderful session and for taking us through, although it's been more than 2 hours, but it felt really engaging. So Fafitai everyone, wish you all the best for the day and God bless. So